Vice President JD Vance completely shattered Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez' defense when he ignored her political grandstanding, refusing to even look up. He simply extended one solitary piece of paper. Page 17. Second paragraph. He instructed. Read it. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stared down at the document, her complexion immediately drained. A couple of years prior, she publicly questioned if a former Marine from Middletown deserved to sit in the exact same room alongside a Yale graduate. Now, she remained the Yale graduate, but that Marine from Middletown sat there as the Vice President of the United States, and he meticulously tracked every single tick of her 20-second hesitation in Munich. She shoved the document back across the wooden witness desk. The noise echoed loudly enough for the broadcasting microphones to pick up. Mr. Vice President, her tone pitched upward by half an octave, I find this profoundly hypocritical. A guy who forged his entire career upon a 300-page memoir discussing his own mother's substance struggles now decides to school a Latina from the Bronx regarding hers. You labeled your situation American sociology. You labeled my situation a federal investigation. Tell me once more, which one represents the actual severe offense? She shifted in her seat, facing the audience. A few supporters sitting in the final 4 rows applauded. One journalist in the second row stayed still. Another journalist in the third row remained silent. A gentleman seated in the front row, holding a creased denim jacket across his knees, refused to clap. You can quote me whatever section you desire, sir. The citizens of the Bronx will quote my record back to you come 2028. She leaned back, folding her arms. Vance ignored those personal jabs entirely. He flipped open the binder resting before him. Its leather exterior appeared battered at the edges and rubbed sleek along the spine. He reviewed his documents for 3 beats. Then, he locked eyes with her again. The citizens of the Bronx have not reviewed page 17 yet, he stated. Let me assist them. He extracted a bundle of documents from the file alongside him. 26 sheets fastened tightly together. The front sheet stated House Ethics Committee briefing concerning the inquiry of Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, published the 25th of July, 2025. He placed the heavy pile onto the desk, separating them. The gown that displayed "Tax the Rich," he declared. Let us begin right there. The initial sheet of her Munich address, held perfectly by a paper fastener inside her grasp, slipped free from beneath her thumb and falling flat onto the wooden table. She failed to notice it. Her fingers remained gripped tightly around the folder. That sheet landed face upward beside the ethics dossier. The heading across that paper displayed Statements drafted for presentation, Munich Security Summit, February 13, 2026. One aide within the audience watched it fall. One journalist watched it fall. Broadcasting lens number 2 caught it falling. Vance completely ignored that dropped paper. Page 17, inside this official dossier, he instructed. Second paragraph. The creator of your dress reduced the leasing fee, directly reacting to demands made by your personnel. I quote, the panel uncovered proof, indicating that the creator likely decreased fees, reacting to remarks made by Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez personnel. End of quote. Page 17. Second paragraph. Recited aloud for the panel. She refused to recite it. I refuse to perform for your amusement, she snapped. This panel resolved this issue 11 months prior. The conclusion stated that I never intentionally broke chamber regulations. I fixed those transactions. That file remains shut. That file remains shut simply because you sealed it. Vance fired back. Only after the Division of Congressional Standards launched their inquiry. Never beforehand. He flipped the sheet. And before we dive into the remainder of this, Congresswoman, that file is definitely not shut. 3 additional files launched this year. We stand ready to review them simultaneously. She attempted to interject. He pressed his palm flat against the document and proceeding with that exact, steady cadence. Met Gala, Substance Therapy, Munich, Taiwan. 4 distinct files. We currently sit on the initial one. If you have waited forever for somebody to confront her with these inquiries in this exact sequence, smash the like button on this broadcast immediately. Share this with one friend who has been waiting patiently too. We are 6 minutes deep. There remain 6 additional pieces of proof approaching. Vance's thumb located, page 9. The fabric of the seat below him produced 0 noise whatsoever. Page 9. That gown was leased for $990. The actual market price, confirmed in documentation by this panel, stood at $3,700. The deficit equals $2,710. You paraded a gown that screamed, "Tax the rich." You compensated the creator less than 25% of what that garment actually cost. Somebody else covered that deficit. Either the creator swallowed the financial hit, or your political backers paid it. AOC's jaw tightened briefly and then locked. That stubbornness remained plastered across her expression. The calculation was clearly starting to click behind her stare. Page 11. A paper shuffled. That noise echoed. The entrance pass for your companion. You visited the Met Gala during September 2021 alongside your former boyfriend, Mr. Riley Roberts. Chamber gift regulations during that period allowed complimentary entrance for a husband or for a dependent. Mr. Roberts was neither. The panel concluded that the pass Mr. Roberts acquired was valued around $35,000. The panel concluded that you, I quote, unlawfully received that present. End of quote. A gentleman sitting in the second tier of the audience adjusted in his chair. He had been gripping a creased, tangent-colored jacket across his knees. His knuckles turned pale, gripping the material. He looked briefly toward the exit at the rear of the room and then straight back toward the testifying desk. The journalist next to him ignored it. Broadcasting lens number 3 noticed. AOC's gaze darted toward the second tier before her mind commanded them to stop. Her stare locked with his for a moment that lingered half a heartbeat too long. She faced the testifying desk again. She refused to glance toward him anymore. "Mr. Vice President?" she snapped, and her tone felt harsher now, carrying a blade that had not existed during the introduction. Identifying a private individual who is not a representative of Congress during a televised inquiry represents exactly the type of bullying strategy. Mr. Roberts visited the Met Gala. Vance's volume did not rise. There exist pictures. The panel dossier identifies him explicitly by name. I am citing directly from the panel dossier. The bullying, if any actually exists, was executed by whoever dragged him into a $35,000 function he possessed zero right to access. Somewhere inside the audience, a mobile buzzed. The proprietor muted it before the subsequent ring. Page 14. I quote, "The panel uncovered proof indicating that the creator, Miss Aurora James of Brothers, likely decreased fees reacting to remarks made by Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez personnel." End of quote. His gaze abandoned the document and locked onto hers. Over in Queens, Congresswoman, a server working at a cafe along Roosevelt Avenue cannot simply phone her property manager and demand he reduce the lease, reacting to demands from her personnel. Because she possesses no personnel, she covers the absolute price for everything she purchases, including the clean uniform she dons for her shift. The uniform that proves she labors for a paycheck. His tone remained flat. The tissue surrounding his right pupil did not. You paraded, "Tax the rich." She taxes the riches herself. Every single Friday, using her personal earnings, handing a federal bureaucracy that extracts 34% before she touches the remainder. The rapid deflection arrived at maximum velocity. "Mr. Vice President, you are misrepresenting. I am misrepresenting absolutely nothing." He refused to elevate his volume. He possessed zero reason to. The panel completed the math. "You spent $990. The garment was valued at $3,700. You owed $2,710 to the creator and $250 to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, covering your partner's meal. You settled those balances during 2025, 4 years overdue, only after the panel ordered you to." The subsequent document slid beneath his hand before she managed to respond. Page 19. I quote, "Although the panel did not conclude that Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez infractions were intentional and malicious, she nevertheless acquired unlawful presence and must accept accountability regarding the additional behavior that transpired concerning the lags in compensation." End of quote. The paragraph ended beneath his thumb. Unlawful presence, refusal to cover actual market pricing, lags in compensation until probed. The panel's exact phrasing, "Not mine." A stylus scraped loudly somewhere inside the media section. The room's climate control hummed. AOC's left hand, the one not resting on the folder, slid toward the border of the desk and squeezed it. Page 21. "The excuse your personnel provided under interrogation," quoting directly from your previous political aide who managed these transactions, "I believe the lag there for me was that I lacked permission to utilize her private charge card at that exact moment." Sworn testimony handed to House Standards investigators. The dossier dropped onto the desk with a sharp, flat smack that the microphones easily broadcasted. "For 4 whole years, Congresswoman. 4 years of stalling. Because, according to your aide's explicit testimony, nobody within your team could locate your private charge card to settle the deficit between $990 and $3,700. Regarding a garment you paraded to one of the most heavily documented functions of the decade, while you occupied a seat on the House Oversight Panel, demanding that average citizens reveal their documentation." She attempted to chuckle. The noise sounded incredibly awkward, and she realized it. Redness flared across her face and then vanished completely within seconds. "You are citing a panel dossier from last summer as if it represents breaking news. Sir, every person inside this chamber understood the Met Gala situation during 2021. The nation moved past it." "The nation moved past it," Vance countered. The server did not. He extracted a creased document from inside the file. The material was the cheap variety vended 10 sheets per dollar at neighborhood bodegas. The penmanship across the surface appeared meticulous. The writer had practiced English for 30 years, yet still formed every character with intense focus. Correspondence delivered to the House Standards Panel Archive on the 2nd of August 2025. Official Archive. Mrs. Maria Santos, Bronx. She operated a bakery on Westchester Avenue for 11 straight years. She shuttered it during February 2025. I quote, "I supported her twice. I shuttered my shop while she attended a gala wearing a garment that cost more cash than my whole month of stock. I handed the keys back to my property manager on a Tuesday. He hiked the lease on the subsequent occupant by $1,600 before the entryway even shut. My representative never once replied to my correspondence." End of quote. The document slapped down atop the dossier with a calculated precision. Vance's tone, when it returned, sounded softer than it had been all morning. She mailed that to her personal representative. Her personal. The office completely ignored it. The second sheet of the Munich address slipped out from the paper fastener and landed beside the first on the desk. AOC refused to look at it. She had started staring down at her own palms. The third sheet slipped free within 10 seconds. Her fingers darted down to grab them, then paralyzed. She refused to retrieve them. A nerve along her jaw twitched once and stopped. Mr. Vice President, her tone currently sounded weaker, the rapid deflection unraveling at the seams. You sit here as a white male from Ohio schooling, a working-class female of color regarding. I am definitely not schooling you, Congresswoman. Something flashed fiercely behind his stare for half a heartbeat and went dead again. I am submitting files into a federal archive. The server on Roosevelt Avenue represents a working-class female of color, too. The grandmother on Hunts Point Avenue represents a working-class female of color, too. The two females sitting in the third tier of this audience, displaying AOC 2028 badges, represent working-class females of color, too. He let the quiet drag longer this round. You possess absolutely no right to speak on their behalf inside this room. They speak perfectly fine for themselves. Mrs. Santos already spoke. The gentleman sitting in the second tier of the audience, holding the creased jacket, adjusted in his chair again. He refused to stand up. Not quite yet. This is segment 1 of 4. If you wish to stick around for what drops in segment 3 regarding Germany, hit subscribe immediately. Type JD below. YouTube suppresses broadcasts exactly like this quickly. You can assist. Now, let us examine who covered the lodging. A secondary file emerged alongside the initial one. The writing across the cover displayed stark black ink FEC records, Ocasio-Cortez for Congress, January through December 2025. Vance refused to introduce it. He merely started reciting. On the 11th of March 2025, your political operation transferred $11,550 to Dr. Brian Boyle, MD, Boston, Massachusetts. A dead pause. The room held its breath. On the 22nd of May 2025, your political operation transferred $2,800 to Dr. Brian Boyle. The silence grew heavier. On the 6th of October 2025, your political operation transferred $4,375 to Dr. Brian Boyle. He ceased reading. The chamber was suffocating on a breath it didn't realize it had trapped, summing up $18,725. The figure hung suspended in the atmosphere for 3 complete seconds. AOC's right hand abandoned the folder for the very first instance in 20 minutes. It drifted toward her beverage glass. The beverage glass sat bone dry. She had never sipped from it. She had merely been strangling it. Dr. Brian Boyle is zero kind of leadership advisor, Congresswoman. He serves as the head psychiatric director at Stella, a facility operating in Boston. His expertise centers on what he personally labels interventional psychiatry. His recovery regimens feature substance therapy. He possesses absolutely zero documented history regarding political consulting, nominee preparation, argument coaching, or campaign tactics. You categorized these $18,725 in expenditures under the FEC bracket leadership coaching and consulting. His stare never abandoned her expression when he dropped the inquiry. His tone remained deceptively calm. Did Dr. Boyle educate you on leadership, Congresswoman? Or did he medicate you? She remained mute. 8 agonizing seconds ticked by. The panel director refused to break the quiet. 8 additional seconds ticked by. AOC's attorney leaned close and muttered. She shook her head once, absolutely refusing to look at him. The evasion arrived finally, much weaker than before. I refuse to debate private health. You do not need to. Vance's cadence stayed totally flat. If it remained private, if it remained health-related, then your political backers possessed absolutely no business funding it. Federal political funding legislation remains unambiguous. I quote, Capital donated to a political panel cannot be diverted toward private consumption. End of quote. Private consumption covers psychiatric recovery, oral surgery, fitness club dues, food, and housing. The statute has remained untouched since Citizens United. A paper displaying a sharp logo emerged from the file. The logo displayed National Legal and Policy Center. Joint grievance filed to the Federal Election Commission and the Division of Congressional Behavior. Submitted the 28th of March 2026. I quote, "There exists substantial cause to suspect that AOC's deployment of political capital lacked a legitimate campaign or electoral objective, but rather served as personal psychiatric counseling." End of quote. Attorney Paul Kamar submitted this 7 weeks prior. The FEC has not yet decided. The Division of Congressional Behavior launched its audit last week. His gaze locked back onto her. $18,725 ripped from citizens who handed your operation $20 at a pop because they desperately believed you represented them. The figure echoed. The figure echoed a second time. The figure was clearly starting to execute its own damage inside the room. A couple of the journalists inside the media section had ceased typing. They were completely mesmerized. The grandmother living in Hunts Point, who mailed your operation $25 scraped from her retirement check, never realized she was funding a substance doctor up in Boston. She truly believed she was funding a revolution. The rapid deflection hit back faster this round, sounding incredibly desperate. Psychiatric stigma represents exactly the type of assault that, "This is absolutely no psychiatric assault, Congresswoman." Vance refused to elevate his volume. He possessed zero reason to. The room had fallen so silent that a single footfall echoing in the hallway completely outside the room sounded crystal clear. Seek assistance. Look after yourself. Cover the bill the exact same way every single other citizen covers it. Straight out of your personal wallet. Never theirs. Never your backers. Never the grandmother's. A fresh section within the FEC file cracked open. The title for this specific one read, "Expenditure Summary, Premium, and Elite Accommodations, January through December 2025. Now, onto the lodging. He refused to recite every single row. He recited the rows that carried weight. Total blown on premium and elite lodging during 2025, $53,500. The figure dropped with a totally distinct gravity compared to the previous figure. 18,000 represented personal shame. 53,000 represented a blatant lifestyle. Hotel Palacio Provincial, San Juan, Puerto Rico. Several visits throughout 2025, featuring a fourth-quarter visit costing roughly $3,900. The exact same municipality you painted in a massive Instagram rant during August 2025 as a casualty of elite gentrification. The exact same lodging where suites kick off at $350 nightly. A paper shuffled, and the shuffle sounded deafening. A raw fish eatery in Manhattan, $150 per head, covering a 14-course culinary experience. Political capital. A seafood joint, situated on the Las Vegas Strip. Political capital. A San Juan lounge where mixed drinks are priced at $22 each. Political capital. A venue lease down in San Juan during the Bad Bunny Festival weekend during August, $28,000. He paused. He stared at her for the absolute first time in 2 solid minutes. You were captured on camera partying inside the penthouse suite, Congresswoman. Looking down from that suite, you can spot Calle Loaiza. Out on the pavement that exact weekend, locals of Santurce were actively protesting the housing spikes triggered by the exact same gentrification you claim you battle. You relaxed in the suite. They marched on the pavement. The silence that hung next belonged to him, never to hers. You do not battle the elite, Congresswoman. You charter flights to join them. Premium cabin, the strike, connected. AOC's posture, which had remained rigid throughout the entire morning, slumped half an inch. Her hands vanished beneath the desk and remained hidden there. The attorney alongside her muttered once more. She refused to pivot her head, and while we sit here tallying the records, the transit, the number 6 rail, the Bronx-bound 6 rail, that you have been endlessly photographed riding for the front page of every single liberal publication across America for the last 8 years. The ticket on that rail during 2025 cost $2.90. The ticket spiked 40 cents during March 2025, the exact same March you were transferring $11,550 over to Dr. Boyle. Your staff refused to publish a declaration regarding the ticket spike. Your staff did, however, publish a declaration that same month regarding a ticket spike over in Madrid. The chamber swallowed the facts. The grandmother living in Hunts Point never received a declaration from her personal representative regarding the rail she takes to her job. The Transit Operators Syndicate over in Madrid definitely did, 8,000 miles removed from the Bronx. A Hispanic gentleman sitting in the third tier of the audience stood straight up, silver-streaked facial hair, heavy boots, a creased sports cap held in his right fist. He refused to speak. He refused to hoist a placard. He merely stepped into the walkway, paced the entire length of the chamber down the side aisle, and shoved directly through the massive oak exit at the rear. The exit slammed shut directly behind him. The hardware clicked with a sharp, crisp noise. AOC watched him exit. Her jaw dropped, snapped shut. A gasp snagged inside her windpipe, and she masked the snag using a hack that failed to deceive the microphones. "Sir, you are exploiting the quiet departure of a Bronx citizen to—" He exploited himself, Congresswoman. He rose up entirely on his own accord. He walked away entirely on his own accord. I merely observed, as did the entire nation. The fourth sheet of the Munich address slipped free and landed with the rest onto the desk. The fifth sheet slipped free within 5 seconds. It completely bypassed the desk. It drifted onto the carpet and rested next to her left heel. She absolutely refused to glance down at it. There sat 3 sheets upon the desk currently, 2 sheets upon the carpet. She had given up attempting to tally them. 3 distinct pieces of proof thus far. The most massive one drops next. Type JD below immediately if you wish to witness exactly what he dragged out regarding Germany. We are halfway deep. Stick around. Vance stood straight up. He had refused to stand throughout the whole inquiry. Now, he finally did. The military posture looked completely undeniable. Deep suit, necktie perfectly straight, the battered binder held tightly in his left fist. He signaled once toward the aide standing at the side aisle next to the media platform. "Cue the Munich tape," he commanded. The 13th of February 2026. Public forum block. Time code 11 minutes, 32 seconds. Roll it from there. The monitors surrounding the chamber illuminated. It displayed AOC, positioned at a podium inside a timber-lined auditorium. Directly behind her, across the rear structure in perfectly illuminated text, read the phrase, "Munich Security Conference." Her personal tone echoed through the chamber directly from the amplifiers. "I believe it facilitated a mass atrocity in Gaza, and I believe that we witnessed thousands of females and minors slain that remained entirely preventable, and therefore I maintain that application of our internal statutes via the Leahy statutes, which dictates restricting backing under any scenario when you witness severe civilian rights abuses, remains justified." Vance allowed the video to roll until the finish. The room sat paralyzed in dead quiet after the sound killed. "Freeze it right there." The monitor paused exactly on her expression, mid-phrase. He placed the heavy binder flat onto the testifying desk directly before him. Straight from the hidden pocket of his tailored coat, he extracted a secondary diary. This specific one featured a tan paper exterior, liquid damaged along the lower border. The edges curved from severe wear. The exterior displayed a year scrawled in faded Sharpie, 2005. Beneath the year, written in the exact same script, Hamel J. CPL, he positioned it onto the desk beside the heavy binder. This specific one belongs to me. Originating from Anbar Territory, 2005. 6 straight months. I operated as a battlefield journalist. The military trained me how to draft reports regarding troops who made it back, and to draft reports regarding troops who absolutely did not. I documented civilian locals who found themselves trapped between monsters who possessed zero care whether they survived. The label scrawled on the exterior represented the identity I carried back then. He kept his palm pressed against the exterior, but refused to crack it open. There exists a sheet inside this diary, Congresswoman, dated June of 2005, a settlement right outside Haditha. A pair of miners, male and female, 11 and 8, trapped squarely between a military tactical unit and a rebel faction occupying the household structure. The military refused to target them. The rebels refused to target them. They perished regardless. I drafted that exact sheet cramped in the rear of a tactical vehicle that reeked of fuel and scorched circuits. I scrawled their identities onto the sheet. I have refused to crack open that sheet ever since. I absolutely do not need to. Their identities remained branded against the interior of my eyelids. He stared directly at her. That represents exactly what armed conflict resembles when you stand directly inside it. That absolutely does not equal a mass atrocity. Armed conflict represents exactly what struck those 2 miners in Anbar. Armed conflict represents exactly what is striking currently in Gaza. A mass tragedy represents exactly what struck the ancestors of the gentleman sitting inside the 3rd tier of this exact audience, trapped in a municipality in Poland during 1943. The terminology absolutely does not mean the same. You exploited them as if they matched. He completely refused to crack the diary open. I have witnessed exactly what militant forces executed during the 7th of October 2023. The tapes ripped from the Nova Festival, the tapes ripped from the settlements of the Western region, the footage the militant forces captured themselves using their personal devices, filming minors, filming grandmothers, filming youths who stood partying 1 second and slaughtered the next. He glared directly at AOC. That represented a mass tragedy. That remained calculated. That represented an organized campaign to slaughter as many Jewish individuals as possible, purely because they remained Jewish. We possess a specific label for that under global statutes. It represents the label the globe cemented into the Geneva structure during 1948 specifically, so we would absolutely never exploit it recklessly. You exploited it directly upon the dirt, where Adolf Hitler originally launched the National Socialist Party during 1921, right inside Munich. He allowed that reality to suffocate the room. Congresswoman, Munich represents absolutely zero coincidence. Munich stands as the municipality, the exact physical municipality, where the N regime was birthed. The beer hall uprising struck literally 5 blocks away from where you stood speaking. You understood that fact when you traveled there. You understood that fact when you stood speaking at that podium. You weaponized the label mass atrocity against the solitary Jewish nation on the planet while standing inside that exact municipality. He pivoted slightly toward the audience to amplify the public sentiment. There exists zero Jewish household tuning into this inquiry this evening that failed to catch that. There exists zero veteran of the American Armed Forces still breathing from the Second Global Conflict who failed to catch that. There exists zero descendant of an Auschwitz survivor who failed to catch that. You absolutely did not deliver a diplomatic policy declaration, Congresswoman. You made a deliberate calculation regarding exactly where you stood and regarding exactly whom you stood beside. An aide illuminated a secondary monitor. A Fox Broadcasting Network clip, Senator John Fetterman. The politician's identity and rank flashed in bright white against a Navy graphic. Senator John Fetterman, Democrat, Pennsylvania. I absolutely refuse to roll the tape, Vance declared. I intend to recite the dialogue because dialogue carries weight, and the dialogue remains incredibly precise. I quote, I believe that the absolute most disturbing aspect regarding her perspectives is she remains simply, hostile toward Israel, and those perspectives, and remaining so completely oblivious to sit over in Germany and charge Israel with a mass tragedy while you sit positioned in Germany. How utterly oblivious that is. End of quote. Senator John Fetterman, Democrat, Pennsylvania, Fox Broadcasting, the 19th of February, 2026. The subsequent document emerged right under his thumb without him needing to even search for it. Senator Fetterman proceeded, quote, there completely lacked any mass tragedy over in Gaza? Absolutely. There exists a cancer inside my faction aligning with pro-militant individuals. End of quote. Exact same Fox Broadcasting interview. He pushed even further, quote, why on earth would you associate yourself with rabid bigots and heavily pro-militant individuals just like Hassan Piker? There exists a cancer inside my faction, aligning with pro-militant individuals exactly like that. End of quote. Senator John Fetterman, Democrat, Pennsylvania. Senator Fetterman happens to be Jewish. Senator Fetterman happens to be a Democrat. The term cancer represents his personal term, detailing his faction. Completely not mine. The chamber swallowed it whole. Two liberal aides standing inside the media platform stood staring directly at one another now. AOC desperately attempted to rebound, and the rebound sounded vastly weaker than she calculated. The Leahy statutes represent a legitimate judicial framework that mandates a solitary index finger shot upward. Merely one. The motion paralyzed her completely. Cease. We intend to dissect the Leahy statutes right now in excruciating detail, purely because you endlessly exploit them as a barrier. The physical legislation slid directly forward. The title displayed, Title 22, American Code, Clause 2378D. I quote, zero aid must be distributed under this legislation or the Weapons Export Regulation Act to any division of the defense personnel of a foreign nation, provided the Director of State possesses verified intelligence that said division has executed a severe abuse of civilian rights. End of quote. The legislation slapped against the desk. Entirely flat. Division. The Leahy statute targets distinct divisions, distinct regiments, distinct squads, verified as guilty of distinct abuses. It absolutely never targets entire countries. It absolutely never targets wholesale armed forces. It absolutely never targets the Israeli Defense Forces comprehensively. Senator Patrick Leahy drafted it precisely that way, deliberately, because a gentleman who operated inside the American Senate for 46 straight years understood the distinction separating an armed conflict from a mass tragedy. His stare locked back onto hers. They appeared terrifyingly calm. The absolute calm itself represented the sheer penalty. You either understand that exact distinction, Congresswoman, and exploited the label regardless, or you entirely fail to understand that distinction and exploited the label regardless. There exist zero alternative scenarios. Select one for the official archive. she prepared to reply. He railroaded right over her, while we remained squarely on the topic of exactly what you grasp and exactly what you fail to grasp during that exact same week. During that exact same journey across Europe, you declared during a broadcasted sit-down that Venezuela sits squarely beneath the equator line. The quiet that dropped next felt entirely calculated. Venezuela absolutely does not sit beneath the equator line. Caracas sits squarely at 10 degrees, 28 minutes northern latitude. Venezuela exists firmly inside the northern half of the globe. Its complete landmass sits inside the northern half of the globe. The nation of Venezuela has completely never existed south of the equator line during any second of its 300-year span as a location upon a globe. The reality hit hard. The reality absolutely did not require hitting twice. This represents a nation, Congresswoman, that you personally cast ballots, imposing embargoes against. You occupy a seat upon the House Financial Panel. You personally drafted bills impacting trade across the western half of the globe. You entirely failed to grasp which half of the globe Venezuela occupied. An additional piece emerged straight from the file. This specific one looked briefer, and during that exact same journey, during that exact same week, right inside Munich, you delivered one additional spatial declaration for the official archive. You informed a German journalist that the European alliance represented a coalition of, quote, 19 participating nations, end of quote. The European alliance possesses 27 participating nations. It has maintained 27 participating nations ever since Croatia integrated during 2013. It remains possessing 27 participating nations tomorrow morning. You failed the count by 8 whole nations. 8. He paused. The statistics were actively executing their own damage. The 6th sheet of the Munich address slipped loose from the fastener and landed with the rest. AOC had completely ceased faking. She refused to watch them drop. The grandmother living in Hunts Point possesses the ability to locate Venezuela upon a globe. Congresswoman, she possesses relatives living there. She understands. The server working in Queens understands. The transit operator driving through Washington Heights, who chauffeured me here this very morning, understands. The officer who marched his patrol across the Bronx for 30 straight years understands. The 8th grade student living in Cleveland, who passed a spatial exam last Tuesday, completely understands. You entirely failed to. He pivoted slightly toward the audience once again, preparing for the gloves, off strike. This absolutely does not concern reading a catchphrase off a teleprompter. Congresswoman, the universe throws you crises you completely failed to prep for. The universe threw you, Taiwan. We intend to roll that exact tape immediately next. However, right before we execute that, I demand every single person inside this chamber to recall she sits upon House Global Operations. She desperately desires to become Commander-in-Chief. She entirely failed to grasp which half of the globe Venezuela occupied, and she weaponized the label mass tragedy, targeting the solitary Free Republic across the Middle East, directly from Munich. The 7th sheet dropped. He slammed the tan Iraqi diary shut, shoved it straight back into his hidden coat pocket, picked up the leather one. This represents the absolute moment to distribute this broadcast. Smash the like button immediately if you have waited forever for somebody to state this publicly. Share this with one veteran inside your household, one Jewish acquaintance, one friend who has been waiting forever. We possess one final piece dropping, the absolute biggest one. Vance completely refused to sit down. Cue the Taiwan tape, he commanded. Exact same Munich Security Conference, February 13th. Public Forum Block. Time code 23 minutes. The monitor illuminated once again. The facilitator's tone echoed clearly through the amplifiers. Sharp, European accented dialect. Would and should the American government literally deploy American forces to shield Taiwan provided China decides to strike? The lens locked tightly onto AOC standing at the podium. Then, absolutely nothing. The timer situated in the corner of the monitor commenced ticking. 1, 2, 3, 4. Vance stated absolutely nothing. He refused to shift. The timer continued ticking. 5, 6, 7. The conservative attorney refused to shift. The liberal attorney refused to shift. The panel director refused to shift. 8, 9, 10. A journalist sitting in the third tier of the audience glanced at his wrist clock, glanced squarely back toward the monitor, glanced at his wrist clock a second time. 11, 12, 13. A gentleman sitting in the front tier coughed loudly once, and instantly clamped his palm against his jaw as if the cough itself felt offensive. The hack echoed loudly inside the room. 14, 15, 16. A youthful female sitting in the second tier, one of AOC's personal aides displaying a tiny coat badge, stared directly downward at her footwear. 17. The director of the panel adjusted his posture. The fabric of his seat produced a tiny noise. 18. A journalist keyed a single character and froze. 19. Vance refused to shift even slightly. 20. Upon the monitor, AOC finally parted her lips. You realize, I believe that this represents quite a... You realize, I believe that this represents obviously a highly historical stance of the American government. Vance stretched forward and smacked the aide's keyboard using 2 digits. Freeze it right there. The room swallowed the quiet for 4 additional seconds, purely because absolutely nobody inside it grasped what to utter. Vance glared directly at her. 20 straight seconds, Congresswoman. We literally just watched it. The panel literally just endured it. The Globe endured it 3 months prior. The Taiwanese administration endured it. The Chinese administration endured it. Every single working household across Ohio whose child would get drafted to battle because you entirely failed to address that crisis. They completely endured it. He allowed it to hit hard. 20 straight seconds feels vastly longer than you imagine. It remains ample time for a mobile to buzz, for a cough to suffocate inside someone's windpipe, for a gentleman to glance at his wrist clock twice over. We literally just counted it simultaneously inside this room. She attempted the rapid deflection. I delivered a comprehensive response that Fox Broadcasting manipulated. Fox Broadcasting entirely failed to author the 20 straight seconds. Vance's tone remained dead flat. You completely did. The hesitation belonged to you. The absolute silence belonged to you. Fox Broadcasting completely lacked a wireless freeze trigger aimed at you during a Munich Security Conference public forum, standing before 300 European diplomatic professionals. He extracted a document straight from the file. The crest appeared basic, a tiny federal emblem. This absolutely avoids classification. This originates from an internal team advisory brief, drafted by lead personnel of the House Global Operations Panel, delivered to the panel's archive division on February 18, 2026. 5 complete days subsequent to Munich. The brief got forwarded to my department a fortnight prior via a standard transparency demand originating from the Senate Global Relations Panel. He recited verbatim, quote, "We absolutely must shield her from China inquiries. She remains entirely unprepared." End of quote. The document landed with the calculated precision of an object that required 0 secondary display, authored by an aide attached directly to your personal panel, to your personal liberal coalition. 5 complete days subsequent to Munich, forwarded purely because it flagged a panic regarding a representative occupying a seat on global operations who entirely failed to be reliable. speaking regarding a hostile republic. That represents the exact tier of faith your personal camp held regarding you. His stare never flinched. Hers absolutely did. Her gaze started darting rapidly toward the audience, then the exit, then directly back toward the desk, following a pattern that the broadcasting lenses entirely captured. Global operations, finances, homeland defense ballots, and your personal camp authored that brief and archived it. A subsequent file emerged directly forward. During that exact same week, the exact week of Munich, you anchored a broadcasted seminar named Understand Your Protections for Undocumented Individuals. Live, public, 40,000 simultaneous spectators. The border czar of the American government, Mr. Tom Homan, questioned the Department of Justice regarding whether your behavior escalated to the threshold of interference with federal border policing. The department absolutely failed to decide, yet the probe remains active. The file slapped down next to the initial one. On the exact afternoon you entirely failed to declare whether you intended to shield Taiwan, you possessed a comprehensive monologue regarding exactly how to dodge federal border officers. You possessed scripts locked and loaded when our internal statutes represented the enemy. You possessed absolute silence when our partners represented the target. For the absolute first instance throughout the whole inquiry, something shattered through the military composure. It absolutely failed to be rage. Rage naturally sounds much louder. It represented a severe, bone-deep silence that the room immediately identified as the split second right before something completely permanent occurs. His jaw tightened briefly and locked. He inhaled deeply once, pulling all the way down, and subsequently exhaled. Congresswoman, sit straight up immediately. She forced herself up. Her posture appeared incredibly shrunken now. The stubbornness that had packed the chamber right at 900 a.m. had vanished entirely. Exactly what survived was a 36-year-old female, desperately struggling to maintain the illusion of a revolution upon her expression. I demand you to comprehend exactly what I intend to declare. I refuse to declare it acting as a Republican. I refuse to declare it acting as a vice president. I declare it acting as a military veteran who operated as a battlefield journalist inside Iraq. A man who witnessed 18-year-olds pulled from Ohio push up transit corridors that absolutely should have remained a politician's burden. A man who returned back and drafted regarding the kids who entirely failed to return back. He inhaled deeply once more. This inhale felt vastly slower than the previous. There exists a household located in Lima, Ohio, that entombed a boy during 2007. He remained just 19. His mother instructs second grade inside the academy where I mastered reading. She entirely failed to get to question the politicians who cast ballots backing that conflict. Whether they actually paused for 20 straight seconds right before they cast their ballots. She gladly would have accepted a mere 2 seconds. She received absolutely nothing. I remain focused on her this exact second. His stare locked back onto AOC. They carried an emotion they entirely failed to carry previously. It absolutely failed to be discussed. Disgust feels vastly simpler. It represented a severe type of frustration that an instructor holds whenever a pupil completely bombs an exam that entirely failed to require being difficult. China monitored that tape, Congresswoman. Taiwan monitored that tape. They monitored it during the exact same afternoon. They remain actively monitoring it right now. They monitor it repeatedly every single week to memorize exactly what the most heavily tracked progressive voice inside the American Congress intends to declare. Provided the crisis turns authentic. 20 straight seconds of absolute silence, followed by a non-response, followed by a smirk. The file slammed shut firmly beneath his palm. The noise it produced sounded incredibly small. The military veteran inside him recognized exactly when the mission was finished. You desperately desired to become commander-in-chief. The heavy binder slammed shut next. The exterior clapped flat tightly against itself. You completely failed to produce a response given 20 straight seconds. He glared at her for one final moment. Whatever emotion had flickered behind his stare a second before vanished completely now. Exactly what survived represented the dead-level glare of a gentleman who had calculated exactly what his concluding phrase would be 3 whole minutes ago. You paralyzed for 20 straight seconds. America completely registered it. 8 exact words. He entirely refused to elevate his volume. He entirely refused to stretch forward. He entirely refused to shift his palm. He merely leaned deeply backward into his seat. The room swallowed the quiet completely. AOC's right hand remained frozen onto the paper fastener. She absolutely failed to shift her hand during over 60 seconds. The fastener had been gripping the documented Munich address. She dragged into the inquiry to shield herself. She stared directly at the fastener. The fastener sat entirely vacant. She rotated the folder painstakingly slowly, exactly the manner a person rotates a bottle they absolutely refuse to believe sits empty. The cardboard exterior flopped open. There existed absolutely nothing sandwiched between the covers. Her skull pivoted, and she stared directly at the testifying desk. There, scattered sheets, several upon the desk, several upon the carpet. The sanitation squad had not yet arrived. She desperately attempted to speak. Her lips parted, slammed shut, parted again. The gasp she pulled felt incredibly weak and entirely failed to reach deep into her lungs. Zero noise escaped. Her right hand finally abandoned the folder. The gesture appeared painstakingly slow and calculated, exactly the manner an individual shifts whenever they have decided something they completely refuse to confess to themselves yet. The metallic badge sat pinned onto her left lapel. Tiny, gold-rimmed, 4 characters painted in white typography across black enamel, "Tax the Rich." It rested pinned upon her jacket during the Met Gala during 2021. It rested pinned upon her jacket inside Munich during 2026. It rested pinned upon her jacket throughout every single media briefing and rally and panel inquiry spanning the massive bulk of 5 whole years. She unlatched it. She placed it straight down onto the desk. The badge and the vacant folder rested right alongside one another. 2 items, both belonging to her, both entirely at the finish line of their functional existence. The badge had rested upon her jacket during the exact evening a creator felt pressured to slash a fee. The folder had rested, gripped inside her fist, on the precise morning she stood speaking inside Munich. They had journeyed right alongside her for years. They sat resting alongside each other, currently atop a federal inquiry table, directly before 7 broadcasting lenses and a national viewership. She stared directly at them. A Senate aide paced directly from the rear of the chamber straight to the platform. He transported a creased message. He delivered it straight to the director. The director opened the message, scanned it, glanced upward. Senator Fetterman desires to submit a declaration directly into the archive. That represented the absolute fatal blow. If you have waited forever for somebody to state it that bluntly, comment 20 seconds immediately. We absolutely are not finished. A massive tidal wave of desertion drops next. Stick around. The panel administrator extracted the declaration right from the archive file. Senator John Fetterman, Pennsylvania, 2, filed at 3:18 p.m. Eastern Time this exact afternoon. I quote, she recited it audibly. Vance entirely refused to interject. I have operated alongside Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez inside the American Congress, spanning 4 complete years. I have cast ballots alongside her regarding a variety of policies. I have viewed her strictly as a peer. Following her behavior inside Munich during the 13th of February 2026, I completely refuse to extend that respect any longer. Standing. Speaking inside the German municipality where the N regime hosted its absolute first assembly and charging the solitary Jewish republic on the planet with a mass tragedy absolutely fails to represent a mere clash of perspectives. It represents an absolute moral collapse. Magnified heavily by today's disclosures concerning the $18,725 completely hidden private psychiatric therapy, the $53,500 blown on elite accommodations, and the historical habit of unlawful presence spanning the 2021 Met Gala. My peer has showcased a habit of behavior completely unbecoming of a representative of the American Congress. I demand her to surrender her panel positions, acting entirely immediately. End of quote. Authorized by Senator John Fetterman, Democrat, Pennsylvania. The clerk placed the document flat down. She entirely refused to glance toward the testifying table whenever she executed it. A secondary aide delivered a subsequent message directly to the chairman. The Democratic Socialists of America, New York City Division, has published a media declaration, acting entirely immediately. The division is officially rescinding its backing of Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, awaiting a comprehensive membership ballot slated for the conclusion of the month. I quote, "Following today's proceedings, the executive panel completely fails to logically justify maintaining a backing that individuals entirely failed to completely sanction during the absolute latest backing assembly, wherein upwards of 500 members cast ballots opposing the backing." End of quote. Authorized by NYCDSA Leadership Panel. A third message arrived quickly. The Bronx County Democratic Panel has published a media declaration. I quote, "The citizens residing in the 16th Congressional Zone demand truthful, transparent, and capable governance. We demand absolutely nothing short of that. We call on Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez to confront these matters publicly and directly." End of quote. Authorized by Bronx County Democratic Panel, the 14th of May 2026. A reporter sitting in the second row of the audience stood straight up and walked rapidly out of the chamber to publish a draft. A fourth note, Representative Adriano Espaillat, 13th Congressional Zone of New York. He has literally just announced a media briefing slated for 5:00 p.m. this exact afternoon, right upon the stairs of the Bronx Borough Hall. The press alert lists the subject as, quote, "Reform of Ethics Inside the New York Congressional Delegation." End of quote. A pair of additional reporters stood straight up and exited. A fifth note dropped. The chairman read this specific one silently, internally, first. He glanced upward at Vance, subsequently read it aloud. The office of the Senate Minority Leader has issued a single-line statement. I quote, "Senator Schumer remains analyzing the proceedings and will have no comment at this precise time." End of quote. The Senate Minority Leader's afternoon schedule, which had previously slated a floor speech locked for 2:30 p.m., has been completely canceled. His office entirely failed to provide an explanation. A staffer standing to the chairman's left whispered something briefly. The chairman nodded agreement and read a sixth note. Representative Wesley Bell, 1st Congressional Zone of Missouri, has issued a statement. I quote, "As a prior federal prosecutor and a black Democrat who defeated a faction member during a primary running on a platform of ethics, I desire to remain direct. The conduct described in today's hearing completely fails to represent progressive values. It is not Latina. It is not woman of color. It is solely corruption. Corruption is corruption entirely, irrespective of the demographic of the elected politician who commits it. I expect my colleagues on the left to say so out loud. I am actively saying so out loud." End of quote. Representative Wesley Bell, Democrat, Missouri, AOC's Chief of Staff, Mike Casca, was fully visible directly through the open door at the rear of the chamber. He remained glued to his phone. He turned his back to the doorway the second he noticed the press riser camera lock onto him. The phone call stretched 30 straight seconds. He disconnected. He entirely refused to re-enter the chamber. The chairman cleared his throat loudly. The chair recognizes the veteran senator representing Arkansas, Senator Tom Cotton, prior Army Ranger, combat veteran surviving Iraq and Afghanistan. He had entirely refused to speak throughout the whole hearing. He spoke incredibly briefly now. Mr. Chairman, this absolutely fails to be a victory for a single soul in this chamber, Republican or Democrat. We actively put an unserious person inside an incredibly serious chair. We let her sit on House Foreign Affairs when she completely failed to name which hemisphere Venezuela occupies. We let her cast ballots on the Defense Appropriations Bill when she completely failed to formulate a stance regarding Taiwan, given 20 straight seconds. We let her represent the United States at an international security conference where she defamed our absolute closest Middle Eastern partner right upon German soil. This absolutely fails to be a partisan matter. This heavily represents a competence matter. This committee actively needs to review the standards by which we assign politicians onto national security committees possessing jurisdiction. That remains my explicit recommendation. I yield. The chairman nodded agreement once and entirely refused to respond. A seventh note arrived at the desk. Statement originating from the Embassy of the State of Israel. I quote, "We have actively noted today's proceedings. The statements delivered by Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez inside Munich on February 13th completely failed to reflect a difference of policy among friends. They absolutely reflect a denial of facts. We remain incredibly grateful to the members of this committee from both parties who have officially documented the truth for the national record today." End of quote. An eighth note. Statement originating from the Taipei Economic and Cultural Diplomatic Office stationed inside the United States. I quote, "We have actively watched the proceedings of this committee today. We completely acknowledge the seriousness with which the Vice President has addressed these matters of intense interest to the people of Taiwan. We possess zero subsequent public comment at this precise time." End of quote. The empty chair situated in the second row of the gallery, the exact chair that had been occupied by Mr. Riley Roberts since the opening gavel, remained completely empty. The folded coat that had been resting across his lap since 900 a.m. completely vanished from the seat. The seat specifically was entirely empty. The reporter beside it was actively talking upon her phone, speaking with her editor. AOC's external attorney leaned closely and whispered to her. She entirely refused to respond. He leaned closely and whispered a second time. She entirely refused to respond. Following 15 straight seconds of being totally ignored, he gathered the papers scattered before him, shoved them straight into his briefcase, latched the briefcase tightly shut, and simply waited. The hearing room was almost silent currently. The reporters who had actually stayed were typing incredibly softly. The ones who had completely refused to stay were actively filing. Vance stretched completely forward, directly across the witness table. He picked up the heavy leather notebook. He gripped it tightly in his right hand for one solid moment. He looked directly at her. "Representative, you came here today intending to defend yourself. You leave completely having proved their case. America absolutely fails to need slogans. America actively needs people who possess the capability to answer the question." 42 exact words. He stood straight up. He picked up the tan Iraqi diary straight from where he had placed it on the table. He put it straight back into his inside coat pocket. He picked up the folder. He walked completely down the side of the witness table, straight past the vacant chair, exactly where Mr. Roberts had been sitting. straight past the vacant aisle, exactly where the man wearing the work boots had marched completely out 2 solid hours prior. He pushed the chamber door totally open. He entirely refused to look backward once. The door closed directly behind him, producing the exact same small, clean latch sound that the Bronx man's exit had made. 6 distinct pieces of evidence, a massive cascading abandonment erupting from her own party, the absolute biggest hearing of the year. Hit subscribe immediately right now if you desperately want next week's follow-up. The FEC ruling regarding the Boyle payments is expected within 30 days. We intend to cover it entirely. Comment directly below exactly what you want us to look at next. The witness chair, situated in Hart Senate Office Building Room 9002, was completely empty by 400 p.m. One solitary page of the Munich speech remained on the floor near the witness table. 2 staffers were dismantling the boom microphones. The C-SPAN producer was actively on his phone, speaking with the network down in Washington. Around 415, Representative Ocasio-Cortez attempted a press conference right upon the Capitol steps. She lasted exactly 90 seconds. A reporter employed by CBS News asked the Taiwan question again. She started to answer. She stopped completely. She turned sharply around and walked straight back inside. Her press secretary, who had entirely failed to receive a promotion to Chief of Staff purely because Mike Casca had completely failed to resign yet, blocked subsequent questions and read a single-sentence statement that entirely failed to address a single one of the 4 chapters of evidence. Around 500 p.m., Representative Adriano Espaillat held his press conference right upon the steps of the Bronx Borough Hall. He completely refused to say her name even once. He utilized the explicit phrasing, quote, "a serious district that actively needs a serious representative," end of quote. The Bronx community organizers packed at the back of the press scrum applauded wildly for 34 straight seconds. Around 530, Stella Clinic down in Boston issued a written statement. I quote, "Stella Clinic provides clinical care to patients strictly operating within state and federal regulations. The clinic absolutely fails to provide political consulting services and has completely failed at any historical time to engage in such services alongside any campaign or political committee." End of quote. The statement entirely refused to mention Dr. Boyle explicitly by name. The clinic's website removed his bio entirely from the leadership page right by 615. Around 600 p.m., the Hotel Palacio Provincial stationed in San Juan removed a framed photograph directly off the lobby wall. The photograph had been a signed image displaying Representative Ocasio-Cortez dancing inside the rooftop suite during the Bad Bunny weekend 8 whole months earlier. A bellman watched the housekeeper yank it down. He entirely refused to ask why. He completely knew exactly why. Around 700 p.m., the activists stationed at the Bronx Community Center, located on Westchester Avenue, situated near the bakery that had shattered entirely in February 2025, held exactly what the local Spanish-language paper described as a wake. 42 residents showed up. Mrs. Maria Santos was one of them. She entirely refused to speak directly to the press afterward. She completely lacked the requirement to. Around 800 p.m., Representative Espaillat's announcement regarding a primary challenge had circulated completely through every single Spanish-language news outlet, stretching from the Bronx straight to San Juan. Around 1000 p.m., his Act Blue page had successfully raised $2,100,000. The average contribution sat at $31. Right by midnight, the hashtag became a global viral trend spanning 17 distinct countries. The hashtag completely failed to be Ilhan fraud or absolutely anything left over from another scandal in another year. The hashtag strictly contained 3 words. The hashtag was strictly #20. Overnight, Senator Fetterman posted a single sentence onto X. I quote, "Some words you simply absolutely refuse to say inside Germany." End of quote. He entirely refused to reply to a single solitary comment. The next morning, the New York City chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America officially filed a formal motion for censure. The motion was scheduled for a vote strictly within 10 business days. Insider estimates pulled from both sides suggested the censure would easily pass, capturing 70% or vast upwards. That exact same morning, the House Ethics Committee announced a fresh, formal inquiry strictly into the $18,725 worth of payments sent to Dr. Brian Boyle. The inquiry was projected to span strictly 6 to 9 months. Trailing that exact timeline, the Democratic primary in the 16th Congressional District of New York would already be completely underway. Around 900 a.m., a moving van sat parked directly in front of a townhouse on the Capitol Hill side of Washington, D.C. Mr. Riley Roberts walked directly out of the front door hauling 2 suitcases. He loaded them tightly into the back seat of a black sedan. A reporter employed by the New York Post was on the sidewalk. The reporter asked a single question. Mr. Roberts entirely refused to answer. He got completely into the sedan. The sedan drove away rapidly. Around 1,100 a.m., the cleaning crew slated for Hart 9002 entered the chamber. The cleaning crew came in strictly once a day. They absolutely failed to be political people. They strictly did their work. The crew supervisor, a woman who had completely cleaned that specific room for 19 straight years, walked directly to the witness table. She bent down low. She picked up the solitary single page containing the Munich speech that had been left entirely on the floor right under the table. She read the first line of it strictly because it caught her eye. She entirely refused to read anywhere past the first line. She walked directly to the bin, situated at the back of the chamber. The bin was marked for recycle. She dropped the page entirely inside. She wheeled her cart completely out of the chamber. The door latched tightly behind her. 20 straight seconds had remained completely enough. If this represents the exact accountability you have actively waited forever for, smash the like button on this video. Formally subscribe directly to the channel. Comment 20 seconds immediately below. We absolutely are not done covering this. Catch you inside the next.